President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi discussed the food security issue, especially in Africa, as well as the latest developments in Ukraine with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The president discussed in a telephone call he received from his Ukrainian counterpart the food security issue, a lot of the great suffering of many people around the world due to the current crisis, especially in Africa. He also stressed on the extreme importance of stabilizing the world food market. President al-Sisi said that the Russian-Ukrainian war casts a shadow over the entire global economy and threatens food security in various countries of the world. Sisi stressed the importance of finding alternatives and solutions to the conflict in order to ensure that people circumvent the negative impacts of the crisis. The Egyptian stance is based on establishing calm, reaching a peaceful solution to the conflict, and exerting all efforts to achieve this, whether on the bilateral, regional, or international levels. The Ukrainian president agreed with President al-Sisi, sharing his country's efforts in ensuring global food security. Both al-Sisi and Zelensky discussed the importance of continuing the grain export initiative, enhancing food security and cooperating in opening Sisi asserted support of all efforts aiming to calm the situation and to advance efforts to reach a peaceful solution to the conflict in a way that prevents bloodshed and paves the way towards peace. The Ukrainian president, for his part, expressed appreciation of Egypt's efforts, highlighting Egypt's influential role at the regional and international levels.
Right, welcome back, and back to you, Dr. Halim, and this phone call that went on between the president and the Ukrainian president, in which the president discussed world food security, supply chains, because they are totally interrupted, and the developments in the Ukrainian war, which is reflecting on the peace and security of the whole world, and taking very, very dangerous turns. The support for a peaceful solution, that was simply a briefing on the content of this phone call. But that also reflects Egypt's position towards settling world conflicts and preserving world peace. How do you view how Egypt dealt with so far conflicts, regional or continental or even world conflicts so far?
Well, that's the role that Egypt is assuming every now and again throughout ages. After the lapse of time, actually, it seems to be quite very much interfering in the interests, as I've just said, of almost all concerned, reaching to a consensus of opinion on almost all sides, saving tribulations and paving the way for negotiations, actually, not only on a local level, but on an international level. The sort of the phone call that had been exchanged between Vladimir Zelensky, actually, of Ukraine, and His Own Excellency, Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi, is a clear testimony to the fact that Egypt is playing such a very much pivotal and very much distinguished role, not only of putting an end for almost the problematic situations and the regional tussles and the struggles among the Arab countries, actually being mediated and situated in the middle and the heart of the Middle East, but actually it would extend to, it would assume such an international arena, actually, in a way that would pave the way for world safety, world security. And in the meantime, this is to be attested to by the sort of the phone call, as I've just said, of today's phone, that would underline the fact that, you know, the superpowers would put their own deep interest, as much as sense of trustworthiness, in the ability and the potentiality of the presidential authority of Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi to solve all these problems. The act of selecting Egypt as being headed by His Own Excellency, Mr. Fattah al-Sisi, to be able to, provide for, a channel, a tunnel of a safety road and a safety valve, actually, to try to save the tribulations of almost all the African countries is a clear testimony to the sort of the vital and the pivotal importance of Egypt and the Middle East. It would extend in such a way as to be able to participate, to select and reject, and to edit, actually, the final solution and the final route to be selected rather than to be rejected. That is the destiny, actually, of Egypt, and the potentiality and the sense of the trust that almost all the presidents of almost all the superpowers would put in the Egyptian presidency. Well, it's undeniable, the fact that the Russian-Ukrainian war would leave its devastating impact not only on European world, or even the American administration, but actually the African countries. And that sort of phone call that had been exchanged between both presidents is a great deal of deep concern of trying to provide the sort of the grains and the baskets of the world that was to be the relict for quite some time to be reinitiated again. In an attempt on His Own Excellency's part, actually, to try to fill the gap. And in the meantime, to play the role of being the mouthpiece and the regional speaker, the authentic role of the speaker, who speaks in lieu of almost all the African countries. Because, as I've just said, it seems to be a wide and very much international problem that would leave a very much devastating impact on almost all the countries of the world. Apart from the energy and the food, there is the question of safety and security, actually. There is a great deal of connection between politics and between economy. The fact that a sort of an individual country that is deteriorating economically would be in like manner politically, and much the same way vice versa. It's not a question of the cart and the horse to put this and that before this and that. It's a sort of the mutual need between almost all the countries. The sort of the Russian-Ukrainian war would give a clear example and testimony, actually, for almost all the countries of the world, that we are in a very bad need for almost each other, that we would have to be very much participating and saving each other from other people's tribulations and sad moments, as much as it had been testified to by the sort of the earthquakes in both Turkey and Syria. Zelensky.
So, let me hear. Right, Egypt has represented Africa, the Arab causes, and spoke on behalf of those two areas which we represent in all the international forums, from the United Nations, this world body, to other African Union, definitely.
True.
To other world bodies. Usually Egypt has raised the African and Arab issues in those forums, that for the causes. And definitely Egypt is part of forces, peacekeeping forces of the United Nations and the African Union at the same time, and is part of the Security Council of the African Union. I mean here that, yes, indeed, the role of Egypt in keeping and preserving the peace.
True. Yeah.
That is from one side, but also on the other hand, Egypt has been speaking loudly about the needs, as you said, respectively, of different regions. Food security, water secrecy, climate change, and how all those threat or have their own repercussions on our regions. How do you view how Egypt dealt and presented those before the world community?
This had been exemplified since quite some time. Perhaps the previous 2 months actually would seem to be quite very much important in representing and solidifying what you have just mentioned right now. Not only the diversification of ammunition, of weaponries, of the different sources of weapons, actually, sometimes from the east, sometimes from the west, at times from France, at other times from the American administration and the Russian administration as well, but also in saving the problems of food scarcity, of water scarcity, of the problem of energy, actually. As I've just said, that this is the role of Egypt, that would strike a very good example and trying to pave the way for almost all these tribulations of saving people's and in the meantime, of speaking in lieu of almost perhaps all the other African countries for the chairmanship of Egypt in 2019, that it would assume the chairmanship of the African Union. It was trying every now and again actually to negotiate and to reach to a peaceful route for solving not only the African problematic situations and all these problems of everyday need, but in the meantime actually to interfere as being selected rather than being rejected by the superpower, to be able to negotiate. The last exemplary sort of visit of His Own Excellency Mr. Fattah Sisi to India, to Azerbaijan and Armenia would give us a clear indication of how successful his own external tools and the Egyptian diplomacy would reach to. We are belonging as much as India is to what you might call the non-Muslim movement. We are very being part since Nehru, since previous God bless his soul, Gamal Abdel Nasser, belonging to that sort of entity that wouldn't be deviated neither to the east nor to the west. We are not very much prejudiced to the United States of America in much the same way that we are not very much lenient to Russia. We are playing a sort of very much resourceful, political game, which is the mutual interest and the deep need to each other without being deviant to one another, without being very much lenient to the other. In the meantime, this is the political game and the political tricky game, actually, which has nothing to do with the feelings and sentiments and the emotional sort of languages based wholly on one axiom that had been propagated and taught to us since the days of Winston Churchill, actually, that's in politics and within the world of politics, that we don't have that sort of sentimental feelings actually to be exchanged with each other as countries, actually. We don't have that sort of sentimental sort of language and repertoire of imaginative feelings. It's based on the mutual interest, not an absolute sense of enmity, not an absolute sense or extreme sense of poverty. Not
there was never, Egypt has never dealt with anybody with animosity. Have you ever seen Egypt aggressive towards any?
I wouldn't say so. I'm just talking about Winston Churchill's axiom or proverb, which is the language of politics has nothing to do with sentiment, actually, or
mutual interests.
Mutual interest,
yes.
Not extreme sense of hatred, not extreme sense of loving kindness, mutually identifying ourselves.
Integrity.
And integrity as much as our personal identity and our own personal needs.
Yes, indeed.
So that's,
indeed, but I have to finish here.
No, it's okay, my pleasure.
Because they just told me twice. Indeed, integrity. Integrity and solid basis for the Egyptian diplomacy.
And solidarity as well.
Yes, definitely. Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, Professor of Political Science, so thank you so much for being with us and for your
input. My pleasure.
My pleasure. Dear viewers, many thanks for watching. Tomorrow will be another important debate with another colleague. Good night.